Hey guys, let's talk about The Sinking City. Released in February of 2021, it's a mystery horror game partially based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Set in the fictional town of Oakmont, Massachusetts, The Sinking City tasks players with solving a number of dark mysteries involving Oakmont and the people who live there. The game was developed by a small indie studio called Frogwares, which mostly had experience developing modestly budgeted Sherlock Holmes games before making the leap into horror with The Sinking City. And on March 6th, 2024, Frogwares announced that The Sinking City 2 is in development with a tentative release date of sometime in 2025. The original Sinking City may not have been a perfect game, but I really enjoyed it, and I was pretty stoked to find out that a sequel is in the works, especially since it looks like the next game is going to lean in even more heavily to the series' Lovecraftian roots. The Sinking City 2 will apparently be set in the 1920s in the infamous city of Arkham, now plagued by a supernatural flood that has brought decay and eldritch monsters to its streets. Apparently, as the game progresses, the floodwater will continue to rise throughout the city, changing the landscape and introducing new mysteries. Knowledge of the first game doesn't seem to be required, since the sequel is going to be its own standalone story separate from the original game. And since a short trailer has already been released for the game, I thought we could take a look at it today in way too much detail and see what the fine folks over at Frogwares have been up to. So the trailer actually starts on a pretty tense note. The atmosphere is dark and moody, and we get a close-up shot of a man holding a gun, clearly bracing himself to face some unknown danger. He checks his ammunition, and we, the audience, are given a shot of his revolver, which only has 4 bullets left. We then get one final glimpse of the fearful determination in the man's expression before the horror he's facing is finally revealed. And right off the bat here, I think this sequence includes a few important details about what to expect in the upcoming game. If you played the original Sinking City, you know that while resource management was a part of the gameplay, it was much more of a mystery horror game than a survival horror game. So you were a lot more concerned with, say, gathering and interpreting clues than conserving ammunition or healing items the way you would be in a survival horror. But it looks like the sequel is going to be different. According to the developers, unlike The Sinking City 1, which was a detective adventure with a horror flavor, The Sinking City 2 will be a full-scale survival horror game with emphasis on combat and exploration. So it looks like the opening scene of the trailer here could be hinting that resources are going to be even more limited in this game than they were in the original. Continuing on with the trailer, we're then given a shot of the first of the eldritch horrors that our protagonist is facing. And I have to say, I really like the monster design here. It might not be the scariest creature I've ever seen in a game, but it looks horrifically beautiful, and it's right on brand with the gross, fishy aesthetic. And if you pay close attention here, you can see that the creature actually manages to sniff out the man before he has a chance to strategize or attempt to ambush the monsters. This might also be a hint at what to expect from the game, and if so, I can really see this working in a true survival horror title. Having extremely limited ammunition in a game full of enemies that can sniff you out and hunt you down does sound like a pretty tense gameplay experience. Anyway, it's obvious that this is not our protagonist's day, because despite having 4 bullets left in his revolver, the gun jams up after only 2 shots. And the monsters actually don't really do anything. All of a sudden, the man's attention is diverted by a mysterious train that appears out of nowhere in the sky. And I think this is a good time to bring up the trailer for the original Sinking City game. Even by today's standards, that trailer was a genuine work of art. It did a fantastic job of establishing a threatening and extremely disorienting atmosphere where nothing was as it seemed. It felt like danger was lurking everywhere, just out of sight. Moving from one scene to another left the viewer constantly questioning what was happening and whether or not what they were seeing was real. The entire trailer felt like walking through a confusing nightmare, which is the perfect vibe for a Lovecraftian horror game. So I can see where the developers were going with this imagery. Like they're trying to establish a trippy, surrealist vibe similar to the original Sinking City trailer. But honestly, I don't think the sequel does as good a job as the original did. In the original trailer, the danger felt ever-present, and the sense of tension mounted with every passing scene. In the sequel trailer, the scenes feel less connected to one another, and moving from one set piece to another tends to undercut the tension of the previous scene rather than adding to it. It's tough to put my finger on why I feel this way, but I think it has something to do with the way the character reacts to the dangers around him. In the original trailer, the protagonist, Charles Reed, kind of wanders from one set piece to the next, almost as though he's sleepwalking. You get the sense that he knows as little about what's happening around him as the viewer does, and that his disorientation is growing alongside the viewers. But in the sequel trailer, our protagonist just sort of seems to forget the danger he's in as it's happening. One minute he's in a tense life or death battle that he seems to be on the brink of losing, and the next minute he completely disregards the monsters to look in the direction of the train. It's such a small, nitpicky detail, but it really does contribute to the overall feeling of the trailer, at least in my opinion. Next, we get a scene aboard the train, which I think is the least effective part of the trailer. Our protagonist sort of nonchalantly ambles over toward a woman in white and takes a seat across from her. She appears to be crying, and there's a phonograph, and I'll be honest, I really don't know what I'm supposed to be feeling here. In fact, I'm not even sure what the character is feeling. His expression is blank, sad, guilty, I don't know. Anyway, things pick up when we get a bizarre little sequence where the woman touches the phonograph and all of a sudden it's covered in worms and she's gone. I'm guessing that this character is meant to be a figure from the protagonist's past, maybe a deceased love interest, but I really have no idea what, if anything, is going on between these characters and whether or not our protagonist is supposed to know her at all. We then get a quick glimpse of some monsters from the original game, so we know there are going to be some lore consistencies between the first game and the second. And in probably one of the more effective parts of the trailer, we watch as our protagonist begins navigating through a dirty, abandoned train car, only to find his path blocked by a creepy figure. An escaped inmate from the asylum, maybe, or maybe a victim of Dr. West? Anyway, I don't know about you guys, but this is definitely giving me Silent Hill vibes in the best possible way. But just as our protagonist attempts to retreat, the train car starts flooding, forcing him to make a daring escape. And again, I think part of the tension is undercut here because the figure he was facing just seems to vanish into thin air, and our protagonist runs right past the spot where the figure was in order to escape the rising water. It might have been a tense moment watching him weigh his options as he stands trapped between his aggressor and the rising floodwaters, but instead the threat just disappears as soon as the main character turns his head, and he seems to completely forget about it, like he's got the attention span of a goldfish. And again, I understand that what the developers are probably going for is that dreamy feel, where one scene doesn't necessarily have to connect to the next. Like, when you're actually dreaming, you'll often move from one place to another without any real logic, and the people and things around you will change as well. So I get what they're going for, but I just don't think it worked out too well in the final cut. It sort of just makes the second trailer feel incongruent, like we're being pulled from one unrelated scene to the next, with very few unifying elements to connect them as the trailer progresses. The original trailer felt much more cohesive from beginning to end, as though it were telling one continuous story. I think maybe part of the reason why the first trailer worked so well was that the danger was always implied but rarely seen, especially by Charles. He wanders from scene to scene with a sense that something's wrong, but it isn't until the end of the trailer that the danger finally reveals itself. And even then, since the end of the trailer just loops back to the beginning again, the viewer is left feeling unsure about everything they've just seen. In the second trailer, though, the danger rears its head almost immediately, and from one scene to the next, it's unclear how much this character knows about what's happening around him. So we don't necessarily feel like we're experiencing the horror right alongside the character as it unfolds, like we did in the first trailer. Anyway, our protagonist bursts out of the train car and into a windy street, in a scene fairly reminiscent of one of the first cutscenes in the original game. The trailer then comes to a close with this. And this is definitely my favorite part of the whole trailer. I love the look of this thing. It's like something you would expect to find in Uzumaki or something else illustrated by Junji Ito. I love that the creature is partially obscured, giving it kind of an air of mystery, and I really like the framing of the shot here, with our protagonist standing front and center, gazing up at this enormous, bizarre monstrosity as it looms menacingly over him. So overall, I'd say the trailer is kind of a mixed bag. We have some genuinely tense moments with creative creatures and intriguing imagery, but at the same time, the disorienting feel and the movement from one scene to the next just doesn't hit the same way it did in the original trailer. And actually, there might be some good reasons for that. In the first place, the development team Frogwares is based in the Ukraine. Given the fact that there's still an active war going on, I'd say they can be forgiven for a few issues with their game trailer. But it may also be that this new trailer is meant to be more of an accurate representation of the game than the original was. When the original trailer for the first game was released, it was widely met with excitement and eager anticipation. But when the game itself dropped, a lot of people were pretty disappointed that the atmosphere and imagery of the trailer didn't necessarily carry over to the game. I mean, some of it did, obviously. There's the post-flood aesthetic, the Devil's Reef Hotel, etc. But considering that a lot of the original Sinking City had to do with solving cases around the city of Oakmont and fighting the monsters infesting the town, the overall game just felt a lot more rational and grounded than the bizarre and disorienting atmosphere the trailer had suggested. So, a lot of people ended up feeling let down and even misled by the trailer. So, it could be that Frogwares is making an active effort this time to place scenarios in the trailer that more accurately reflect the gameplay experience. And based on some of the copy that the developers have released, it looks like the horror elements of the Sinking City 2 are going to be a little more pronounced than they were in the original. As I mentioned before, Frogwares originally got their start developing small-scale Sherlock Holmes and other mystery-solving games. The Sinking City was their first horror title, but you can definitely see the developers' mystery roots shining through in the gameplay. According to the development team, though, Frogwares is actually planning to use the Sinking City 2 to pivot the studio toward a more horror-focused future. The company's head of publishing released a statement in March saying, "The original Sinking City is still one of our most successful titles, most likely because of stronger horror genre leanings and setting. We created quite a few detective adventures in the past, so now we're going to mix things up to keep doing what people love about us, meaning story-rich experiences, while still being able to evolve. The industry is changing around us, and we want to secure the studio's future." So by the sounds of things, Frogwares is definitely going all in on horror, and I think that makes sense. I mean, as I've said, I love the original game and the focus on mystery, but one common complaint I've heard, and one that I think is perfectly valid, is just that the original Sinking City wasn't really scary at all. The story managed to draw inspiration from a number of Lovecraft's tales, but again, the focus was on unraveling the dark mysteries of Oakmont, rather than instilling a sense of dread and fear in the player. And in my opinion, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the game may not be scary, but I've read a lot of Lovecraft, and his stories aren't always scary either. Plenty of them read more like dark mysteries than straight-up horror, at least in the modern sense. So it didn't really bother me personally, but I can definitely see where other people might have been annoyed or disappointed. I mean, setting the source material aside, the game was marketed as a horror title, and if you're going to label your work as horror, it's perfectly reasonable for people to expect to be scared and to be disappointed when they're not. And it looks like the developers at Frogwares are doing a pretty good job of balancing the studio's new horror focus with its past mystery leanings. Apparently in the Sinking City 2, there's going to be an option to do a little sleuthing and investigate the mysteries of Arkham, but this gameplay feature won't be mandatory. According to the game's executive producer, "We want investigation to be a beneficial part of the game, but just for those who want it, offering tangible gameplay bonuses and eureka moments without being a requirement to progress. By taking time to piece together clues, you'll arm yourself with more knowledge and awareness of your options versus just coming across them by chance." So, what do you guys think? Are you excited for the Sinking City 2, or would you give this one a pass? Personally, I'm still really psyched for the game. I know I just spent the last 10 minutes nitpicking the trailer, but I nitpick because I love. Anyway, I'm not planning to buy the sequel because of the trailer. I'm planning to buy it based on the strength of the original game and what I've seen from Frogwares so far. But it looks like I'm going to have to wait a while because the game is still in development. There's a Kickstarter planned, but it's not active yet, so those of us who are interested will have to keep checking back. And that's about all I have on the Sinking City 2 trailer. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you agree with my opinions? Do you disagree? I'd love to know in the comments. Until then, see you next time.